Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Well, I see myself with a master's degree for sure. At this point, I'd like to go for a master's, but I think it's very possible that I might continue on to my PhD. But if not, I would see myself working in a museum. I mean, I love museums, so... and I definitely want to do something working with the public as well.
Now, when you go for your master's or even a PhD, don't you have to get a little bit more specific in your field of study? If so, what specifically would you like to go into?
Well, I do have a lot of experience working with vertebrates. So with paleontology, you often specialize in either vertebrate or invertebrate. So my research during my undergraduate degree was in vertebrate paleontology, and I worked on an extinct clade of birds called the teratorns, which were these large condor-like birds. So I would love to work in birds. I'd love to work with prehistoric birds, but at the same time, I feel like I would also be very interested in mammals. My interest lies in the Cenozoic, which is the most recent era. So it's the era that we're in right now. And that's when mammals and birds dominated versus the Mesozoic, where dinosaurs and reptiles dominated. So yeah, that's probably what I would want to specialize in, but it kind of depends on where I apply, and that's really precisely why I want to go for a master's before my PhD if I decide to do a PhD, because I just am not quite sure yet what I want specifically with research. So I feel like a master's gives you a lot more room to figure that out.
What advice do you have for anyone that might be interested in a job like yours?
The advice I give younger kids is continue learning. Just continue learning, because all throughout your life before college, if you just continue to read and watch documentaries and go to museums and talk to people and just educate yourself on what interests you in paleontology, you will be so much farther along than other people. Second piece of advice is volunteer. I think that there's a huge benefit to volunteering, and that might mean that you volunteer with, a food bank. It doesn't really matter, but I would say volunteer in something with animals or in science. So volunteer at a museum or volunteer at a nature center, and just getting that experience just working towards something and helping something, I think really helped me in the long run.
Are there things that some people are surprised to learn about your profession?
I think they're surprised to learn that it is a profession. Because a lot of times I get this look of oh, that's real? People are actually paleontologists? And with kids, when I talk to kids and their families, the adults are often very surprised. They say, oh, I thought this was just something kids like, that type of thing. And I think it's just sort of, we live in a world that sort of sees dinosaurs as something that are just fun and cool and for kids, and you don't realize that there's this whole study behind it. And it's not just dinosaurs, it's everything that lived before us. And paleontology can be applied to so many different areas of study. Really, paleontologists are scientists. It's an area of science going to.
Was there any specific classes in college that you enjoyed or that you specifically hated?
Oh my gosh, well, the hated question is organic chemistry for sure. It's so difficult. It's like learning a new language. Classes that I specifically loved was, there's 3 or 4 that come to mind, but the first is sedimentary geology or sedimentology. In that type of class, which is offered in any geology department, you learn about the basics of sedimentary rocks and the layers of the earth, and that's just so important with paleontology. And even if you are a biology major, you should definitely try and take a class like that if you want to be a paleontologist. It's just so important to understand where these animals lived, and you understand that based on the rocks. And then second one would be anatomy, vertebrate anatomy, and I didn't take a traditional anatomy class. I just didn't have time in my schedule, but I did take a comparative vertebrate morphology class. And, obviously if you're looking to go more into invertebrates, you would want to take more of a paleobiology class, something using clams and shelled organisms to learn about environments and things like that. But for me, as a vertebrate paleontology, learning the anatomy of the skeleton was just so fascinating and so eye-opening, and it made me a much better paleontologist. And then the third one would be paleobotany. A lot of people kind of brush past botany, study of plants, as sort of just an addendum to paleontology. And actually what I learned is that paleobotany is the core of paleontology, because plants dictate our environment. It's because of the plants around us that all these animals can live, and they're the basis of our food web, and they're also the basis of our climate. And so to learn about the different plants that have lived throughout the history of the earth and how they shaped the environment that animals lived in will just put you worlds beyond other paleontologists, I believe, because it's just so important. And then just the last one, for me, I just absolutely love birds. I'm a huge bird watcher. So my personal favorite class in college was ornithology. Just because I really love birds.
Are there any certifications or licenses that are useful in your field of study?
There really isn't anything that's necessary for this field of study. You don't really need any necessary certifications or licenses, but I will say, specifically if you're interested in field work, first aid, wilderness training, things that have to do with survival out in the wilderness are all really, really important for that type of thing. I think when you're hiking around and being out in the field, that's good to know.
And now, after you graduated and you were looking for work, was there a strong possibility of having to relocate to find work in your field after school?
I would say yes. You most certainly have to locate most of the time, or relocate. If there's not an opportunity where you're currently living, you have to move. And with paleontology, there's just not a lot of jobs. And I'm not saying that there's no job. It's just a lot of the career jobs are pretty competitive with paleontologists. So that's why a lot of people sort of hop to different internships to gain experience and go to post-secondary school to make themselves a more competitive applicant, so they do have more of a choice of where they get to be. But other than that, yeah, you really just gotta move where the jobs are, where you find an internship or a position. I'm from California, and I've lived in Utah, Montana, and now North Dakota just throughout the summers. And that's just a really good example of the fact that you have to move around oftentimes. And also, paleontology, the majority of it is really in the the Western states. I don't know exactly the geographical term for that, but Montana downwards, that's just because that's where most of the fossils are. It has to do with the deposits of rock there. And so, as a result, most of the jobs are in those states. But, wherever a university is, and if they have a department or a section of the department in paleontology, you can definitely work there. You just have to keep gaining that experience to make yourself a competitive applicant, because there's just not a lot of positions. And, unfortunately, paleontology is not the first thing that gets funded. If you're talking about biology, it's the medical field that gets funded. If you're talking about geology, it's the oil field that gets funded. So paleontology, it's incredibly important. It's an incredibly important study, especially to climate and climate change and environmental studies. But at the same time, it's not like we're saving lives here. So it doesn't always get the same amount of funding, and as a result, there aren't the same amount of jobs. So I would say relatively difficult to get a job, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. I mean, I haven't had an issue getting jobs in the summer. I just have had to make sure that my application's really good and that I'm continuing to build on my application and my resume. It's gotten easier over time.
Do you ever have to do any traveling for your job?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say mostly domestic traveling, and I wouldn't say traveling within the job necessarily, but for jobs you have to travel. And within jobs, it's usually the traveling is just kind of local, like traveling to a field site. Maybe it's like 6 hours away, that type of thing. Traveling to a different museum. A lot of people who are getting their master's or PhD have to travel around to look at specimens for their research. So they get to maybe even go to Europe or Africa or places just to find specimens that they need to look at. And then if you're really high up, especially like a curator or a professor at a university, you often do get to do field work abroad and wherever you want to do it. It just has to do with the resources that you have. So I would say it's a pretty travel-heavy career, honestly.
Was there anything you did or didn't do in high school or college that you would recommend somebody do?
Maybe more research experience. I got quite a bit of research experience, but I wish that I had been a bit more on top of it and got more done more research projects and worked with more people during college. But, that's just such a tricky thing because college is honestly just hard. And you're always working and always trying to get good grades and also have a social life. So research wasn't my number one. But I think if I were to change anything, it would be putting more effort into research experience. Because even if you don't want to go into research, it's just a really good experience. It gives you knowledge about a topic, a specific topic that is just, it's just really valuable to have that in paleontology.
Were there any classes, activities, or books that made an impact in your professional life?
So there's a famous paleontologist named Jack Horner, and he's like the name that everyone thinks of. He's a dinosaur paleontologist. He worked with Jurassic Park. I really do love his books. He's a great writer. I think his books had a huge impact on me during high school because it just gave me a lot of information about the field, but it also helped me sort of understand what day-to-day life was as a paleontologist, what I was getting into. And then there's one of my favorite books is by an author named Brian Swidek, and he's a science writer, specifically a paleontology writer. And he did a book called My Beloved Brontosaurus, and it's about how paleontology has changed over time. And so Brontosaurus is a class example. It's not a valid name because it was one of those situations where someone names a dinosaur and then someone names the same dinosaur a different thing, and then all of a sudden Brontosaurus stuck in everyone's mind. And how that taxon is actually it's invalid. It's actually a podosaurus. That's the real name.
Wow, that's interesting. Cool.
So whenever someone says Brontosaurus, correct them. Say it's actually a podosaurus. But it also just goes into a lot of really interesting areas of study in paleontology, specifically with dinosaurs. And it's just kind of one of those introductory books on paleontology that got me excited and got me thinking. And so I really liked that. Yeah, and then, lastly, I would say museums. I mean, the Field Museum in Chicago, I was lucky enough to be able to go there quite a few times because my family's from Wisconsin, and so we would always take trips down to Chicago, and that had a huge impact on my desire to be in the career.
Do you have any other advice for kids that might be in high school or in college that are undecided on what they want to do?
My main piece of advice is follow your passion. And I understand that not everyone has a passion, but I think that through learning about different things, especially in science, you'll find a passion. I feel like everyone can find a passion in science. And, I just really do believe that you should never just do something just for the money. I mean, obviously that's a privileged viewpoint, but I think that even though maybe it might be harder, it might be more work, it might be more time to become a paleontologist, it's worth it if you're passionate about it. And so if you have the ability to do that, do it. Also, my second piece of advice is you can always change what you do. Nothing's set in stone. And I think as human beings, we grow throughout life. And I'm getting a little philosophical here, but we really do. I'm constantly learning new things around me and even getting new hobbies and interests. And I think follow what you're interested in. And you don't always have to stick with one thing. If you want to be a paleontologist and then you figure out that you actually want to be a botanist, that's okay. Just give yourself some leave and follow your passion.